That Sunday morning, Shaq only needed a place to get some water after his tire blew out on a quiet road on the outskirts of Memphis. He walked into the first small church he saw, faded tin roof, worn brick walls, and he heard a voice coming from a room at the end of the hall. A voice he thought he had forgotten since 1999. Inside that room was the only woman who had ever sat beside him when he was nobody yet. And she was still doing the exact same thing, just for different kids now. What Shaq was about to learn, about 18 years of her life. About 14 children who were about to lose their only place to learn. About an 8-year-old boy with no father. None of it was going to let him walk back out that door. But first he would have to face things that money could not fix. A building about to be shut down. A boy on the edge of giving up. And a decision to stay, not for one day, but for 9. The road through East Memphis at 8:17 on a Sunday morning looked like time had stopped there around 1987 and never started back up. The asphalt was cracked and broken. Tree roots had pushed up through the edges of the road. Small wooden houses sat quiet behind rusted iron fences. No coffee shops, no neon signs, just the sound of early cicadas and the smell of wet grass from the night before, still hanging thick in the August Tennessee air. Shaq was sitting behind the wheel of a rented Ford Explorer, gray, because nothing bigger was available, and he was staring at the front right tire, flat against the road like a long sigh. He did not curse. He did not hit the wheel. He just sat still for 3 seconds, lips pressed together, then opened the door and stepped out. The heat hit him right away, hot and wet, smelling like clay and rotting leaves. He stood up straight, and the roof of the car barely reached his chest. He looked down at the tire, let out a slow breath, then reached for his phone. No signal. 2 bars, then nothing. He looked around. On one side, an open field of wild grass. On the other, a road that went on forever. And about 300 yards ahead, a faded green tin roof, a small wooden cross nailed to the top, a front lawn that someone had mowed clean even, though the ground was spotted with mud from the rain. A church. He did not think long. He locked the car, pushed his phone into the pocket of his worn jeans, pulled down his gray hoodie, and started walking. Every step left a deep shoe print, size 23, pressed into the wet dirt. The wooden door of the church had no lock. It opened with a dry creak, like the sound old knees make getting up from a chair. Shaq stopped at the doorway, ducked his head to clear the wooden beam above, and stepped inside. It was a few degrees cooler in there. 2 ceiling fans turned slowly overhead. The room smelled like old wood and leftover candle wax from yesterday's service and something lighter drifting from somewhere down the left hallway, chalk dust and the inside of old books. An older woman was wiping down the benches near the front. She looked up. Her eyes went wide, then narrowed as she tilted her head back to take in how tall he was. Shaq raised one hand, not a wave, just a sign that he was not there to cause any trouble, and said quietly, "Sorry to bother you. I just need some water. My car broke down on the road." She nodded and pointed toward a small kitchen at the end of the hall. He followed, turning his shoulders sideways to fit through the narrow doorframe. And then he heard it. From a room at the end of the left hallway, a woman's voice. Not singing, not praying, just a regular voice reading a short passage out loud, pausing in the right places, waiting, then going on. Slow, patient in a way that only comes from doing the same thing thousands of times, until the slowness feels completely natural. He stopped walking. It was not that he recognized her right away. It was the rhythm, the small pause between a hard word and the next one, like the reader was breathing first, before letting the other person breathe too. He had heard that rhythm somewhere before. He stood still in the hallway. The old woman had not, yet handed him the water. Dust floated in a strip of light cutting through a small window. He did not move. Then he heard one more sentence. And he knew. The classroom door was open a crack. He walked over and stood in the doorway, head ducked low, because the ceiling here was even lower than the hall, his shoulders nearly touching both sides of the wooden frame. Small room. 8 wooden desks in 2 rows. A chalkboard on the wall still showing marks from the week before. A map of the United States pinned to the wall at a tilt, the top right corner peeling away. 2 yellow fluorescent lights above, flickering faintly like they were thinking about going out. And at a desk near the window, a woman in a white and blue checked shirt sitting next to a boy. The boy sat in a chair too big for him, feet hanging well above the floor, old black sneakers tied neat and straight. He was bent, over an open book, his index finger moving slowly along the line of text, lips working through each word. The woman leaned toward him slightly, black hair with streaks of gray, pulled back behind her neck, back straight, one hand resting on the table near the book, not touching it. The boy stumbled on a long word. He stopped, his breath catching. She did not correct him. She did not say a word. She just placed her hand gently on his shoulder and waited. Something tightened in Shaq's chest. He remembered. Back in 1999. A small rented room in Baton Rouge. A dim desk lamp. Pages of a final paper spread across the floor because the table was not big enough. He had been reading out loud, working through coursework for his bachelor's degree at LSU, while still playing center for the Orlando Magic, reading slowly, stumbling, reading again. And someone had been sitting beside him, holding a red pen, but not using it to mark his mistakes, only to underline the places he got right. Same way of waiting, same hand on the shoulder. The boy looked up right at that moment and saw him. His mouth dropped open. No sound came out, just his lips parting at the sight of a giant man ducking his head in the doorway, shadows stretching halfway across the classroom floor. The woman turned to follow the boy's eyes, and they looked at each other. Shaq was not ready for that moment. Not the way you are unprepared because you did not think of it, but the way you are unprepared because nothing on earth could get you ready for seeing someone you have not seen in 25 years, in a small classroom on the outskirts of Memphis, on a Sunday morning, when you only stopped because of a flat tire. Loretta Mae Cousins looked at him. She did not stand up right away. She held his gaze for exactly 3 seconds, not more, not less, then turned back to the boy and said calmly, her voice completely unchanged, "You did real good today, Marcus." "Let's stop here." Marcus glanced at her, then looked back at the man in the doorway one more time. He slowly closed his book, tucked it into his backpack, climbed down from the chair, his feet hitting the floor with a small thud, and walked out past Shaq, through the side door. As he passed, the boy kept his eyes tilted straight up, like he was checking to make sure the man was real. Then he was gone, just the two of them in the room. Loretta stood up. No rush. She had no reason to rush. Shaq could see it right away. The way she rose was the way a person moves when they have nothing left to prove to anyone in the room, including the man standing at the door. She looked at him and said one word. Shaq. Not a question. Not an exclamation. Just his name, said in the voice of someone who had repeated it inside their own head enough times that it no longer pulled at anything, or had learned how to stop letting it pull. He said, Loretta, then nothing, because he had nothing else ready. No opener he had planned, no explanation that made any sense. He was standing here because of a flat tire and because of a voice reading to a boy whose feet could not reach the floor. That was all, and somehow, in a way he could not explain, that was the most honest reason he had. They sat down at opposite ends of the long wooden table in the center of the room. She poured 2 cups of water from a glass pitcher on the teacher's desk, cold, no ice, with a faint metallic smell from old pipes, and set one in front of him without asking. The room smelled like chalk and old book covers. The ceiling fan turned slowly. Outside the window, the cicadas kept their steady rhythm like a clock. Neither of them was in a hurry. He asked if she was doing all right. She said the same as always. He asked how long she had been teaching here. She said 18 years. He did not say anything for a moment after that, because 18 years was a number he needed to sit with before he asked anything more. 18 years. No pay. She said it the way you talk about yesterday's weather, that she bought used books herself, from the church sale table, split packs of 12 pencils 3 ways, used the cheapest notebooks she could find, because kids learning to read need paper, not a nice cover. That the class had 14 kids, ages 6 to 14, mostly children of families working shifts at a food packing plant on the south side of the city, or truck drivers running short routes through Memphis who had settled down nearby. That every book was being shared by 3 kids on a rotating schedule. One kid reads it Monday, passes it on Wednesday. He listened without cutting in. Then she said one more thing, same steady voice, like she was reading a grocery list. They sent a notice 3 weeks ago. The building is out of code. Needs to be fixed within 21 days, or it closes. Cost is $14,800. I applied for funding in 4 places. All 4 said no. He looked at her. How many days left? She looked back. 9. The room went quiet. The fan creaked. Outside, a child ran across the yard and was gone. And Shaq understood what she had not said, that she was not telling him this to ask for help. She was telling him because he had asked, and that difference mattered more than any number she had just given him. Reverend Calvin Oakes found him standing in the hallway, back against the wall, cup of water in his hand. The pastor was short and thin, wire-rimmed glasses, salt and pepper hair, white shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbow. He looked up at Shaq the way a man looks at something, after he has already seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by what shows up in his church on a Sunday morning. You want to hear about Marcus? He asked. No lead up. Shaq nodded. Reverend Oakes walked him over to a window looking out at the yard. Marcus was sitting alone on the concrete front steps, head down, staring at his shoes, one finger drawing slow circles on the pavement. 8 years old. His father left when he was 3. His mother works 2 shifts at a frozen seafood packing plant on the South End, 4 in the morning to noon, then 3 in the afternoon to 9 at night. 3 hours between shifts to get home, clean up, eat. No one home after school. Reverend Oakes kept going without stopping. School sent a warning letter last week. Reading below grade level. Risk of being held back, if he does not improve, before the October review. He stopped. Loretta works with him 2 hours every Sunday. That is all he has. Shaq looked out at the yard. Marcus had not moved. Head still down. Fingers still going in circles on the concrete. His old black sneakers tied straight. And even, like someone had taught him, that when you cannot control much in your life, you can at least tie your shoes right. He knew that feeling. He thought about Newark. About the house near Fort McPherson in Georgia, when his stepfather Philip Harrison was stationed there. About how every evening his father made him sit down and read out loud, before he was allowed to go outside, not because his father needed to hear it, but because he knew a kid from Newark with no one sitting with him at a table was more likely to find a different road. Marcus did not have a Philip Harrison. Marcus had 2 hours on Sundays. Shaq turned back to Reverend Oakes and asked one question. Let me see the closure notice. The notice was 2 pages. Small print, stamped in red, from the Memphis Building Authority. Shaq read it standing up, turning each page slowly. Roof, full replacement needed. Electrical system, wiring below current safety code. Ceiling and classroom walls, signs of long-term water damage, partial collapse risk. 3 main items. Total cost, $14,800, per the city's technical estimate. He folded the paper and set it on the table. Then he made a call, not to his bank, not to an assistant. He called a man named Raymond Cutts, owner of a small construction company in Memphis he had met through a community real estate project in Shelby County back in 2019. Short call. He gave the address, said there were 3 items to look at, asked if someone could come first thing Monday. Raymond said yes. He hung up and made 2 more calls, one to an independent electrician named Dennis Fowler that Reverend Oakes gave him the number for right then, and one to book a room at a small motel 2 miles from the church. Sunrise Inn, $74 a night. He booked 9 nights. Reverend Oakes had watched every call from start to finish. When Shaq hung up the last one, the old pastor said quietly, "Who are you exactly?" Shaq looked at him. "Someone who's staying 9 days. Monday morning, he was there at 7 sharp. Gray hoodie, old jeans, black coffee in a paper cup from the Shell station a mile and a half away, the kind that has been sitting on the burner a little too long, but still hot." He set the cup down on the table in the front hall and started day 1. Raymond Cutts showed up at 7:23 with 2 workers and a moisture meter. They went room by room, knocked on walls, climbed up to check the roof, from inside, opened the electrical panel. Shaq followed along, mostly quiet, asking questions when he needed to, and writing notes in a small notepad he had picked up at the convenience store near the motel. One of the younger workers, maybe 22, hat turned backward, looked up when Shaq bent almost in half to squeeze through the low frame of the storage room doorway and said, "Man, how tall are you?" Shaq did not look up, tall enough to know this ceiling is under code. The young man did not ask again. By 10 in the morning, Raymond Cutts sat down with a sheet of paper and slid it toward Shaq. $19,200. Shaq looked at the number, said nothing for a moment, then asked, "What kind of roofing material are you using?" Raymond said, "Standard commercial grade. There's a type that runs about 20% lighter, holds heat better, same cost range." "You know it." Raymond looked at him. "Yeah, most people don't ask about it. I'm asking. Run it again." Raymond ran it again, then went through the electrical section line by line. When Shaq asked about each sub-item, what needed full replacement, what just needed upgrading, what could stay, if it was properly tested. Raymond was an honest man. When Shaq asked the right questions in the right places, there was no reason to keep the number padded. Final number, $13,400. They shook hands. Shaq's name was not on the contract. The client listed was Reverend Calvin Oakes on behalf of the church community. On the afternoon of day 4, Shaq walked into the empty classroom at 4 o'clock. Marcus was already there. Nobody had called him. He had just come on his own, sitting in the same chair he always used, too big, feet hanging, backpack on the table, not yet open. They looked at each other for a moment. Shaq pulled out the teacher's chair, hard wood, straight back, old legs that groaned loud when he sat down. 325 pounds settling into that chair sounded like with saying a prayer. He dragged the small desk toward him, the surface barely half the width of his forearm, and set his book on it. Not a textbook, a thin paperback he had picked up at the convenience store that morning, the kind for young readers, big print, pictures taking up half the page. He opened to the first page. Marcus watched. Shaq started reading out loud, slowly, his finger running under each line, pausing at commas, stumbling on purpose once or twice, then getting it right. Marcus looked down at his own book, without anyone telling him to. They read like that, side by side, for 15 minutes, before Marcus spoke for the first time. He said it without looking up. "How come you read so slow?" Shaq did not look up either. "Because I need to understand it before I keep going." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "You ever not understand something? All the time. What do you do?" "Read it again." Marcus looked back down at his page. He placed his finger on the first line and started reading out loud. Day 5, a summer storm rolled in fast the way Memphis storms do, quick and hard, hammering the temporary tarp the workers had laid over the roof while waiting for new materials, loud as a drum. Water came in through a small gap at the corner of the classroom and spread in a thin puddle across the old wood floor. Earl Giddens, 68 years old, retired electrician, 30-year church member, white hair, hands roughened from decades of wire work, pulled Shaq aside and said, "I'll do the electrical for free. Just need you to cover the materials." Shaq looked at him. "Why?" Earl nodded toward the main hall, where an older woman was arranging chairs for the afternoon. "My wife. She's been coming here every Wednesday morning for 15 years. If this place closes, she's got nowhere to go." He paused. "She hasn't slept right since her stroke last year, but Wednesday mornings she's up before I am." He said it and walked away. Did not wait for an answer. Shaq watched him go for a moment. Then he took out his phone and called in an order for the electrical materials from the list Earl gave him later that afternoon. On day 6, Loretta brought out 2 glasses of iced tea after Marcus left. She set one in front of Shaq, sat down across from him. Neither of them spoke for a moment, just the ceiling fan and the steady sound of hammers on the roof coming down like a heartbeat. Then she asked, "Why haven't you left?" Not angry, not a challenge, a real question. He looked at his glass, tapped the table once with his finger, then said, "I's not quite meeting hers, because in 1999 you didn't leave when I wasn't done yet." She was quiet. He kept going. "I didn't know how to say thank you back then. I didn't even know I needed to. I figured staying was just what someone did, that it came with the territory, that I didn't know anything more than that. I was wrong." Loretta looked at him for a moment. Then she said it, not bitter, not accusing, just the plain truth of someone who had lived with something long enough that it no longer hurt the way it used to. "The hardest thing isn't staying, Shaq. The The hardest thing is seeing that someone needs you to stay before it's too late. The room went quiet for a long stretch. He did not answer, because no words would have been more right than the silence right then. He just nodded once, slow, and turned to look out the window. Outside, the afternoon sun had dropped low enough to throw long shadows across the freshly patched concrete in the yard. The workers on the roof had gone quiet half an hour ago. The evening cicadas were starting up. There was nothing more that needed saying. On day 8, Marcus read a full paragraph without stopping. No stumbles, no pauses. His finger moved smoothly along each line, his voice rising and falling in the right places, reading all the way to the end before he looked up. Shaq looked at him. Marcus looked back with the expression of someone who had just done something they were not completely sure they had actually done, not quite happy yet, not quite proud yet, just checking if it was real. Shaq nodded, said nothing. Marcus flipped to the next page on his own. Nobody told him to. Shaq sat there watching him read and understood something he had missed from the start. He had not taught Marcus to read. Nobody teaches anybody to read in 8 days. Loretta had done that work for 18 years, one child at a time, 2 hours every Sunday. What this boy had needed was not a new teacher. What he had needed was a man willing to sit down with him long enough that he could believe someone was not going to get up and walk out in the middle of things. Shaq had just been the one who stayed long enough. That was not nothing, but it was not everything either. Day 9, 6:45 in the morning. Shaq stood in the yard and looked at the building. The new roof had gone up the night before, deep green, shining under the early Tennessee light. The electrical work had been done since 2 afternoons ago. The classroom walls had been treated for water damage and painted over in white, not the bright white of an office, but a soft, warm white, the kind that comes from a wall that has had people living near it for a long time. The classroom windows had new yellow curtains that Earl Giddens' wife had sewn herself and brought over on the afternoon of day 7, without saying a word to anyone about it. At 11 in the morning, the city inspection team arrived. 2 men, green vests, clipboards. They went room by room, took notes, checked the electrical panel and the drainage. Shaq stayed outside the whole time, did not follow them in. He drank coffee from a paper cup, looked out at the road in front of the church, the same road he had walked up 9 days ago, with a flat tire and no cell signal. At 11:47, one of the inspectors stepped outside, wrote something on a form, signed it, stamped it, and handed it to Reverend Oakes standing at the door. Passed. Reverend Oakes stood there looking at the paper for a moment, then looked up. He scanned the yard until he found Shaq. When their eyes met, the old pastor nodded. Once, slowly, the way a man nods when there are no words that cover what needs to be said. Shaq nodded back. That afternoon, Shaq sat with Reverend Oakes in the pastor's small office behind the main hall, a room that smelled like old paper and wood oil, shelves packed from floor to ceiling. They signed a 3-year book commitment, 486 books sorted by age group, 1 set per child, renewable each year, as long as the class kept running. The name on the paperwork was a small community education fund, not Shaq's name. Reverend Oakes looked at the document, then at him. Why not put your name on it? Shaq set the pen down. Because this classroom doesn't need my name. It needs books. He stood up, shook the pastor's hand, and walked out. He stepped into the classroom for the last time at 4 in the afternoon. Marcus was already there, same, as always. Nobody had to ask him, reading on his own, finger tracing the lines. His feet still did not reach the floor, but he was not stumbling. He read to the end of a page, turned to the next one. Did not look up. Shaq stood in the doorway. He did not go in. He just watched for a moment, the small fingers moving along the text, the old sneakers tied straight, feet hanging 1 handspan above the floor. He did not say anything. He just stood there long enough to know the boy was going to be all right. Not because Shaq had been here, but because someone had been here before him, 18 years, every Sunday, 2 hours, and that person was going to keep being here long after he left. He turned and walked back down the hall. The corridor was empty. Late afternoon light cut through a window at the far end, laying a long strip of gold across the old wood floor. Dust moved slowly in it. No rush at all. Loretta was standing at the far end of the hall. She said nothing. He said nothing. They looked at each other across the full length of that old corridor, him at one end, her at the other, 25 years and everything that cannot be taken back stretched out between them. He gave a small nod. She nodded back. He walked to the front door, ducked his head under the beam one last time, and stepped out into the Tennessee afternoon. The next Sunday morning, a delivery truck pulled up in front of the church at 7:30. Two men unloaded 8 large cardboard boxes, each one labeled by hand, sorted by age group, the writing clear and neat. Reverend Oakes signed for the delivery. He did not ask where it came from. He already knew enough. At 9 o'clock, Sunday school began. 14 children walked into the classroom, freshly painted white walls, a roof that did not leak, windows softened by yellow curtains that let in the early light gently. Every child had their own seat. Every seat had a book waiting on it. Loretta stood at the front of the room and watched them sit down one by one. Marcus came in last. He stopped inside the door and looked around at the new books stacked neatly on each desk, at the name written on the first page of the book at his seat in thick black marker, printed large and straight. He stood looking at that name for a moment. Then he sat down. He opened the book, placed his finger on the first line, and read out loud, steady, no stumbling, his voice clear and easy in the quiet Sunday morning room. Loretta watched him read. Then she looked out the window. The parking lot out front was empty. Just a few old cars belonging to congregation members, parked at angles under the big oak tree. No gray Ford Explorer. She stood looking out for a moment. The early morning Tennessee light came through the window at a low angle, softer than noon, warmer than late afternoon, the kind of light that only shows up in summer before the humidity has thickened all the way into heat. Behind her, Marcus was still reading. 13 other children were reading too. 14 children reading at the same time is not noise. It is a sound that only people who have sat inside a classroom can name. The sound of a room doing exactly the work it was built to do. Loretta turned away from the window. She walked to the first desk, sat down beside a 6-year-old girl who was staring at her first page with wide, uncertain eyes. She placed her hand gently on the little girl's shoulder and waited, outside, on the cracked road running through the east side of Memphis, the same road where a flat tire had stopped one man on one particular Sunday morning in exactly the right place. The morning kept going the way Sunday mornings do. Like nothing had happened. But one thing was different. The classroom was still there, still open, still room enough for 14 kids to sit down, open a book, and begin. And that, from here on out, was enough. But before any of that happened, before the new roof, before the yellow curtains, before 486 books lined up on 14 desks, there was a night when Shaq sat alone in room 7 at the Sunrise Inn and stared at the ceiling. Low ceiling, even by normal standards. He was lying on a double bed, with his feet hanging well past the edge. The wall unit AC hummed like a giant mosquito and only brought the room down to somewhere between bearable and not great. $74 a night. He had stayed in much nicer places. He had stayed in worse ones too. None of that was the point. The point was that he was lying there at 11 at night thinking about Loretta. Not in a romantic way. Not the sweet, heavy kind of thinking people do about someone from a long time ago. He was thinking about what she had said on the afternoon of day 6. The hardest thing is seeing that someone needs you to stay before it is too late, and he realized he had heard that with his ears, but understood it somewhere else entirely. He was thinking about his stepfather Philip Harrison, the strict Army sergeant who had moved the family from base to base, who never once said, "I love you" out loud, but who showed up to every one of Shaq's basketball games from 8th grade onward, including the games Shaq played badly, the ones where he did not want to look up at the stands. That man knew how to stay. He did not teach it with words. He taught it by being there. Shaq had not learned it fast enough. Back in 1999, when Loretta sat beside him reading, through his paper at 2 in the morning, he had taken that for granted the way you take for granted a lamp on the desk, a stack of papers, the warmth of someone sitting beside you. He did not name it. He never stopped to say thank you. He kept moving forward the way he always had, because that was what he had been taught, because that was what had gotten him this far, because stopping felt like losing ground. Until she was not there anymore. And then he had called it things like, it just wasn't the right time. called it the way things go, called it other names. He never called it what it was. Lying in room 7 at the Sunrise Inn, listening to the AC rattle the thin walls, Shaq understood that she had never needed him to come back. She had built a life that did not need him in it, and she had done it a long time ago. 18 years of teaching, 12 years of night shifts, partial hearing loss in one ear, still showing up every Sunday. She did not need saving. What he was doing here was not saving anyone. That was what he had finally understood over these 9 days, that he had not come here to pay off a debt, had not come to fix the past. The past does not get fixed. A new roof does not repair 1999. 486 books do not buy back the year she sat in that room alone. He had come here because a tire went flat at the right time on the right road, and because of a voice reading to a boy who could not reach the floor, and because of an 8-year-old kid in a chair too big for him, with his shoes tied straight. And he had stayed because it was the right thing to do. That's simple. He closed his eyes. The AC kept humming. The ceiling stayed low, and for the first time in 9 days, he was asleep before midnight. There was one detail Shaq did not know until the morning of day 7, when Earl Giddens mentioned it, while the two of them were finishing a final check on the electrical panel in the storage room. Loretta Mae Cousins had not taken the job at the food packing plant because it was the only thing she could find. She had a college degree in elementary education. She had taught full-time at a public school in Memphis from 2001 to 2009, 8 years, 3rd and 4th grade. In 2009, the school lost its funding. She was one of 17 teachers let go in the cuts. She applied to 12 other schools over the next 2 years. None of them took her, not because she was not qualified, but because the cuts had hit the whole district, and there were more teachers than open positions. In 2011, she took the night shift at the packing plant, and she kept teaching on Sundays because that was the one thing she could do without needing anyone to hire her. Earl said it plainly, not to make a point, just because he figured Shaq should know. Then he tightened the last screw in the panel and said, "Done. Electrical's good." Shaq stood alone in the storage room after Earl went outside. The new bulb burned clean and white. The wall cracks had been filled in and smoothed over. The air smelled like fresh cement and paint that had not fully dried. He stood there for a moment with nothing to do. Then he went back outside and kept going with day 7. There was also a small moment on the morning of day 8 that nobody else remembered. He had arrived early, 6:30, while the dew was still on the grass, and the sun had not come up enough to warm the concrete. He stood in the yard and looked at the building. The new roof was almost done. 3 of the 4 rooms had been painted. The classroom windows had new wood frames set in straight. The small church, which 9 days ago had looked like it was waiting for someone to say it was okay to fall down, now looked like it had just remembered why it was still standing. He was drinking his gas station coffee and looking in when he heard small footsteps behind him. Marcus had come early. He had walked from home, a row of rental units 6 blocks over. His mother's morning shift had ended at 6, and she was not back yet, backpack on, a plain cracker wrapped in a paper towel in his hand. The boy looked up at Shaq. Shaq looked down at him. "You're early," Shaq said. Marcus shrugged. "I couldn't sleep." "How come?" Marcus looked down at his shoes for a moment, then said, head still down, "I was scared tomorrow would come, and you'd already be gone. And I still can't read good enough." Shaq looked at the boy for a moment. Then he dropped down, 325 pounds crouching on wet morning grass, so his face was level with Marcus's. "Listen to me," he said, voice steady. "You can read. You read better than yesterday. And tomorrow you'll read better than today. Not because I'm here. Because you show up every day and you don't quit." Marcus looked at him. "And one more thing." Shaq kept going. "Miss Loretta is going to be here after I leave. She's been here 18 years. She's not going anywhere. You understand?" The boy nodded. "All right then." Shaq stood back up and brushed the grass off his jeans. Marcus watched him, then unwrapped the cracker and took a bite, standing next to him in the early morning, without either of them needing anything else said. They stood there for a while, the giant of a man and the 8-year-old, both looking at the freshly painted building in the soft gold light of a Tennessee morning before the day began. One more thing happened on the afternoon of day 9 that was not in any contract or agreement. After Shaq signed the paperwork in the pastor's office and walked out, he stopped by the small kitchen at the back of the church, the one where an older woman named Ruby May made coffee and cornbread each Sunday morning for the congregation members, who came in early. Ruby May was washing dishes. Her hearing was not good, so she did not hear him come in. He knocked softly on the kitchen doorframe. She turned, looked up at him, and immediately wiped her hands on her apron. "Let me fix you a bowl," she said, not asking if he wanted one. He sat down on a small chair in the corner. It groaned under his weight, but held. She ladled grits into a white ceramic bowl, sprinkled a little dried onion on top, set it in front of him along with an old silver spoon that had long since gone dull. He ate. The grits were thin and lightly sweet, smelling of butter and salt, the kind that only comes out right when someone has been making the same recipe for 30 years. Ruby May went back to washing dishes, her back to him. No more conversation. He finished the bowl in silence. Then he set it on the table, stood up, and said, "That was real good. Thank you." She did not turn around, just gave one small nod and kept washing. He walked out. That was the last meal he ate in that church. And in a way, that had nothing to do with big ideas or deep meaning. It was the moment he remembered clearest from all 9 days. Not signing the contract, not the building passing inspection, just a bowl of grits from an old woman who did not ask who he was, who only saw someone sit down and put food in front of him. Because that is what people do for each other. Simple as that. And at the end of all of it, after the 9 days, after the roof, and the wiring, and the 486 books, and the 2 glasses of iced tea, and Ruby May's grits, and the early morning standing in the yard with Marcus, there was something Shaq carried back with him that he could not name right away. It was not until he was driving out of Memphis, the road ahead clear, the tire holding just fine this time, that he found the right word. It was not forgiveness. He had not needed forgiving. Loretta was not holding anything. She had let it go a long time ago, the way you let things go when you are too busy living a real life to keep carrying the old hurt. It was not making things right. A new roof does not make anything right. Books do not give back the years she sat in that room alone. Nothing from those 9 days added up to something equal to what had already passed. What he brought home, what he finally had a word for, was clarity. Clarity about what he had not seen at 27 years old. That the people who stay beside you when you are not, yet anything, that is not a given. That the patience of someone sitting next to you and waiting while you work through every hard word, not correcting, not pushing, just waiting, is rarer than talent and worth more than money. That sometimes the only thing an 8-year-old boy needs to believe he can learn is a man willing to sit down with him and not get up and leave in the middle. He had known that in 1999, the way you know something you have not put into words yet. Now he knew it in his chest. Memphis shrank in the rearview mirror. The road opened up ahead, old asphalt, tree roots cracking the edges, wooden houses quiet behind iron fences. The same road, the same Sunday, just this time he was driving away with a good tire and something lighter inside.